It wasn't until 1977 when I was living in Morgantown, West Virginia, and working at a university teaching hospital. And I had initially done 1 year in oncology. And while it was a wonderful experience, people were dying every day. So after a year, I decided it was time to make a change, and I would do obstetrical nursing. And I would see life in the beginning and new life coming into the world. It was on my orientation, my first days at the teaching hospital, and I was given a little clipboard with the list, make sure you do this, this, and this. And so I was following the clipboard, and I'd go in and make sure everything was set up for surgery, go into another room, make sure everything was set up for a delivery. And then I went into what was called the dirty utility room to make sure it had been cleaned up from the shift before. And I heard a sound that's imprinted into my heart. And it was just like a little purring sound. And I turned the light on, and there on this dirty utility counter was a child laying there. And I went out to get help, and there were doctors and nurses. They were sitting around the nurse's station having coffee. And I told them that I found a baby laying on the dirty utility counter. And the doctor said, "It's an abortion. Just let it go. It's an abortion." And at that time, I could only think of a miscarriage, and I thought maybe I imagined that it moved or that I heard something. And I went back and I looked, and then realizing that nobody would help me, I picked up the baby and I said, "I baptize you, John, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." And I gave that child back to the Lord. Before he died, I had the opportunity to hold him, and I told him that I would let everybody know what he went through, what I saw that day in the dirty utility room.
Welches Ziel Sie haben, ob Herr Chamberlain mit der Bibel kommt oder nicht.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision...
They're bundles of cells. Can they exist without a woman's body incubating them? No.
If they make a mistake, I don't want them punished with a baby.
We will save the right to life of each innocent human being in existence at fertilization. So help us God.
About killing, we're talking about
that's what abortion is. If the
a personal decision of a woman, depending on circumstances in her life, to choose or not to, to have a child or not.
To murder her child.
One person decides that life begins at conception, that's their opinion, and that I, as a different human being, can decide otherwise as my own matter of opinion.
Since January 22, 1973, over 55 million so-called fetuses have been aborted by their mothers for reasons varying from inconvenience to the possible death of the mother due to complications during pregnancy. Since then, there has been an ongoing debate whether abortion is murder or an unfortunate necessity in our society. As our world presses toward the future, it will only be told what that future is by the sum of the choices that we as a society make. And so the question remains, when does life begin?
You know, when I was a young girl, I think in my early 20s is when Roe versus Wade was passed. And prior to that time, really in our society as young women, we never heard the term blob of tissue. We never heard fetus. When a young girl or a mother was pregnant, it was she's having a baby.
At the point of conception, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, as soon as you have a fertilized egg, all the information for that unique human being is right there. It's a unique combination of information. It's a different combination of information to the father and to the mother. It's a unique individual. So from a perspective of science, if we want to say that, we know that at the point of conception, we have a human being.
Life begins at conception. So when the egg and sperm unite and become one, that is the beginning of an individual life that then grows, and as it grows in the womb, the only difference from, say, you or me when I was a baby in the womb is just one's bigger than the other. You have a different stage of development. There's essentially no difference because it is life. And we know from Scripture that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. In the book of Jeremiah, God talks about how He ordained Jeremiah as a prophet before he was born. He knew he had a purpose and plan for his life. In Scripture, Isaiah talks about that God has created everybody for His glory. And so we know that He is, especially, you read Psalm 139, that He is purposing and planning, so to speak, for that individual life that's going to be created by that mom and dad. So there's no question. And it used to be, when you would read in medical dictionaries, for example, that they would say conception is the beginning of life. And now it's changed.
They said, let's go in, and they actually switched the definition of conception. You see, this is a great way to fool everybody. And most people don't realize the standard for medicine is Stedman's Medical Dictionary. And all the way up, this is the 26th edition here, all the way up, if you read conception in here, it is basically when the sperm and the egg combine. Basically, it's fertilization. But guess what? The 27th edition of Stedman's Medical Dictionary came out, and they redefined conception. What they said was it is no longer the act of conceiving to become pregnant or fertilization. According to this 27th edition, here, let me read it for you. The act of conceiving, the implantation of the blastocyst in the endometrium. Basically, it's no longer sperm and egg combining. It's the sperm and egg combining, and it has to move down and implant into the uterus.
Ethicists all the times are trying to decide, when does life begin? Because they want to say, well, up to this point, it's okay to basically murder a child. And there are even some individuals that say it happens after birth. It doesn't even happen. We're not even talking abortion here. We're talking actual murder outside the womb, so to speak, of individuals because they feel it's okay, in other words, till they're sometimes even 2 or 3 years old, to go ahead and do away with them if there's something wrong, it's just not convenient anymore, or for whatever reason, that should be allowable.
It's very complexing to me that in law of man, it is fine to abort a child on this day, but then illegal the next. Which is why we have people in the medical profession over in England now debating whether or not we should have abortion after birth. I was interviewed by BBC right after 2 young people from Oxford decided that if we allow abortion in the womb, why not abortion after birth? Why not allow sex selection? Why not partial birth abortion? And to me, there's just a fine line there, and I see that we are on that slippery slope.
With a partial birth abortion, the abortionist finds the position of the baby inside the womb using ultrasound. Then he reaches inside the womb with a set of forceps, essentially a large set of pliers, so he can grasp the feet of the baby. He then drags the baby out of the womb and out of the birth canal feet first, so that in the end only the head is left inside the mother.
So the head is, let's say the mother ends here, and so essentially right here. So what the abortionist would do would be to get a scissors and stick it into the baby's neck right at the cranium, at the back of the skull, make a hole. And when this happens, the baby will do what anyone would do that is startled with pain. He will extend his legs, he will extend his feet, his hands. And then the abortionist with that hole will put a suction tip in there and drive it into the brain and suck out the brain. The baby goes limp, and then the baby's removed.
I think it's evident that when we talk about partial birth abortion, the pro-abortionist has no regard for the child. They have one mindset, and what really is evident is that partial birth abortion, as C. Everett Koop, our former Surgeon General, said, is never necessary for life of the mother. Technology today has given us the ability to treat the fetus in utero, and not only that, when it is necessary to abort, we can recreate the womb through medical advancements. We have incubation and high technology for meeting the needs so that the child can continue to grow and develop outside of the womb.
We had a former leader of our country who was taught that partial birth abortion was okay because the soul and spirit of the child did not enter the body until the doctor cut the umbilical cord and the baby breathed on its own. That's totally not true according to Scripture. As a matter of fact, when the Bible talks about the babe in the New Testament, it uses a Greek word for a breathing thing, something that is a living, breathing life. If an infant in its mother's belly did not have life, it could not grow. A plant that doesn't have life cannot grow. An animal that doesn't have life will not grow. It will be a stillborn. And so if that infant can grow from just a seed at the conception to a 8 or 9 pound or 7 pound or 6 pound living being, it is a life. It is a life from the very beginning. If it were not a life, there would be no growth process taking place in the womb of the mother. And so, very clearly from Scripture, the soul and spirit of the baby comes the moment of conception and grows along with the fetus inside of the mother.
I think there's been a big lie that's been promulgated through the Planned Parenthood and those pro-choice people in our society that have tried to ease the conscience of women in saying that this is just a blob of tissue, it's a fetus, you know, just have the procedure, go home and go on with your life.
Well, Charles Darwin was a naturalist in the mid to late 1800s, and he is really the father of evolution by natural selection in the sense that he really promoted and popularized that idea, kind of gave a mechanism for evolution, for the idea of evolution, that all living things basically have evolved from some sort of simple organism over a period of millions and billions of years to be all the living things that we have today. So that was really what he basically championed, and he really sought to sort of remove God from the equation. His one daughter, Annie, died at a very young age, and it had a great impact on him in the sense of how could a loving God, right? And he would see nature, and he would see it, you know, red and tooth and claw, and he just really couldn't understand how there could be a good God in the face of all of that. And so one of the things I think that he really sought to do was to try to eliminate him.
One of the things that Darwin stated in his book, The Descent of Man, in 1871, was that the Caucasians were essentially superior and that they should exterminate all other races. Now think of that from an evolutionary perspective. What they're thinking is, okay, things are evolving, you get to the Caucasians up here on top, they should exterminate the others so there's no competition for them. And you know what? He actually made the statement, not even centuries would pass before people would start to exterminate these others.
The founder of Planned Parenthood, initially the Birth Control League that became Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, was a colleague and an associate of people who were closely connected to Adolf Hitler. And as Hitler was learning and becoming the most diabolical processor of genocide and eugenics through what happened, the horrible Holocaust to the Jews, the millions of Jews that were slaughtered with Hitler, Margaret Sanger was studying that.
Margaret Sanger was really a social sort of activist, women's rights activist, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood back in she was born in 1879, so she really became active in this area in the early 1900s. And she founded what was called the American Birth Control League in 1921, and then that eventually became Planned Parenthood in the 40s. And she was a member of the Socialist Party. She was very much attracted to the party's fight for women's liberation of basically sexual desires and birth control, and just really liberating, so to speak, women completely. And she was very much a eugenicist too. And eugenics is a term maybe not a lot of people are familiar with, but it basically means well-born, or being born with certain desirable characteristics that a society considers desirable. So, for example, for the Nazis, for Hitler, it was light hair and blue eyes. Okay, for many societies, it means not having certain diseases or certain deformities. And so she was a eugenicist, and with Planned Parenthood, that was what she kind of started to basically promote those eugenic ideals, because she felt that especially things like helping the poor, helping the sick, helping the diseased was really degrading the human race, and that humans could very much evolve into higher planes, higher levels, if they could just get rid of the undesirables, so to speak.
And so Dr. Sanger in the United States of America began to use some of those practices. She stood and spoke to a group or a gathering of the Ku Klux Klan and educated them on how to conduct some types of genocide and eugenics, and saying that it was very important to practice population control. The population that Dr. Sanger in America around the 1920s or so, she wanted to control the Negro population, and she said colored people are like weeds and they need to be exterminated.
Well, Margaret Sanger, there's no doubt that she felt that the other races, quote unquote, that were not Caucasian were genetically inferior, and she says that. A lot of people tend to make her out to be not a racist, but her writings are freely available online, and you can read them and you can see from that she felt that every race that was not Caucasian was genetically inferior. So she wanted to basically decrease those populations over time. And so that's why she opened up a lot of these birth control clinics in areas that were mainly populated by people of other nationalities. There's no doubt that she believed in evolution. There's quotes from her that show that she, again, wanted man to progress to a higher evolution, and if these types of things that she was suggesting were implemented. Her journal, The Birth Control View, one of the taglines at one point was birth control to create a race of thoroughbreds. And so her eugenic goals were very, very clear in that. Eugenics is just sort of the foundation of it, the very basis of it is evolution. It comes from that. It's just the practical application of that essentially to man, and saying, well, if evolution is true, then this is what we need to do to make sure that man continues to evolve. So Hitler took it to an extreme level in the sense of he didn't want to just control the birth of certain peoples, he was just going to murder them and get rid of them completely. And so it's sort of that extreme side of eugenics, which is it's just a natural outpouring of that.
See what Adolf Hitler was thinking in the Nazis? Okay, they were thinking along the same lines, Caucasians on top, but they took it one step further. They said the Aryans out of the Caucasians were on top, so everybody else should be exterminated. And so, I mean, they had targets for Jews, they had targets for the Poles, the Slavs, a number of others. Of course, the Jews took the brunt of it, if you look at that. But he was thinking in terms of an evolutionary worldview, that they are the superior race and that they need to exterminate everyone else. A direct reflection of what Darwin taught in his book, The Descent of Man. Now, think of that repercussion ever since. I mean, look at World War II. Look at the number of deaths as a direct result of that. Other famous evolutionists, Joseph Stalin. I mean, there's estimated 20 million people died just because of Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao. Look at the number of people who have died as a direct result of an evolutionary worldview. And we think of that in terms of wars or people just being annihilated within their countries. But you know what? Another direct result is the unborn. When the unborn are killed, people view them as though they're just animals, which is exactly what people like Charles Darwin was teaching. And if they're just animals, why not get rid of them?
People would say that eugenics sort of died out with the Nazis, and that whole idea of getting rid of a certain people group sort of died out, but it didn't. It just became quiet and careful. Same principles, same ideas, just different means to accomplish them. And one of the ways that that is happening today is obviously through abortion, through organizations like Planned Parenthood, and they're still very much pursuing these eugenic ideals.
We live in a culture where the belief in evolution of millions of years has taught us fact through our education system, through much of the media. As you bring up generations of kids in an education system where they're throwing God out, the Bible out, prayer out, and you teach them that everything happens by natural processes, life came about by natural processes, there is no God, and that man is just an animal, then that's going to greatly affect how they view issues like abortion. In other words, you get rid of spare cats, get rid of spare kids, what's the difference? You're all animals anyway, what's it matter? Whereas if we start with the Bible and we say that God created, there's an absolute authority, we have that history in Genesis that's foundational to the rest of the Bible is God's word, that's to be the foundation for our worldview, then we know that abortion is killing a human being, and deliberately killing a human being like that would be wrong. And therefore, on the basis of our absolute authority, we'd have a basis for saying that abortion is wrong.
I believe my journey is like that of so many women. It was born out of pain and the scars from abortion.
My story began when I was 16 years old. I met Steven Tyler at a rock concert in Portland, Oregon, and we began a relationship just that first night we met, and it lasted for about 3 years, but it ended in a terrible, horrific abortion.
May 17th, 2004, I was at a party with some friends of mine that I thought were friends, and unfortunately I ended up in a situation where I was drugged by a stranger. I was given a horse tranquilizer and a beer, and within minutes I just remember my head hitting the floor.
There's no earthly way you can deal with killing your own child. But I had that abortion 2 weeks after Roe v. Wade. Instantly knew I had killed my baby. If I ventured to tell anyone that I'd been bad enough to kill my child, they quickly told me it was a woman's right to choose and it was okay. And so what I think we do with those remarks is encourage that woman to stuff her feelings that there must be something wrong with her if she feels uncomfortable with the abortion decision.
When I first met Steven, we lived together in Boston, and I thought I was just the luckiest girl in the world. I really clung to him as kind of a new hope in my life.
And I woke up on a folding couch in the living room with my clothes off, and the person who was so nice to me the night before was still laying there, and I felt like I was hit by a truck. I was bleeding and I was just not, I knew what had happened, but it hadn't really sunk in, and I just knew I had to get out of there.
Nothing worked in my life. I'm one of those statistics that was divorced. A higher statistic of couples who have abortions or divorced than people who lose a child by natural or accidental means. Actually, it's about 75% of relationships that conceive a baby that is aborted break up within 90 days of the abortion, as my marriage did. Nothing worked anymore, but I found something that did. Every time I sold another woman an abortion in some very sick, twisted way, if she was okay, just maybe I was okay.
We were living together in Boston for just a few months, and he told me that he needed to become my legal guardian so that I could travel on tour with him. And I didn't really understand all about the legalities of guardianship, but I told him I didn't think that my mother would sign the papers for him, and he had come to me a few months later and said that she had signed the papers and that he was my legal guardian and I would be able to tour with him while he was on the road with his band.
So I went home and I wasn't strong enough to tell my parents or anybody what had happened because I was embarrassed and I was just, I felt totally humiliated and I didn't want anybody to know. So I thought the best plan of action would to be like, act like nothing happened. So I just remember putting a big smile on my face and walking through the door like everything was fine.
I evolved into the abortion industry. I worked for a man who owned 4 abortion clinics. I ran 2 of them and more than doubled his business, but he would not share that money with me. So I took his best abortionist. I'd recruited him after all. And we opened our own abortion clinic at 1625 West Mockingbird in Dallas, Texas. The first month we did 45 abortions. The last month we did 545 abortions. And you wonder why I remember those numbers. I didn't have a salary. I worked on a straight commission, $25 for each abortion. So that last month my income was $13,625, but that was not enough. I wanted to be a millionaire, and I knew how to be a millionaire. 40,000 abortions a year would make me a millionaire.
I felt very vulnerable and rejected by my family that I had been signed over to him. And in a way, he was kind of like my last hope at that point. I felt like I was just clinging to him, hoping things would turn out all right.
And then I went into the bathroom and I got the shower as hot as I could get it. And I was in there for a long time. And I remember just crying and just praying, and I couldn't scrub enough. I couldn't get the water hot enough, like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get that dirty feeling off of me. So I remember getting out and just thinking, if I act like nothing happened, it's gonna be okay, and nothing happened. So I went on with life.
So I had to start selling abortions to hit that goal of 40,000 a year. And how do you sell an abortion? Well, it's actually too simple. Our goal was 3 to 5 abortions between the ages of 13 and 18 from every girl, so we had to get into the schools. And we had to break down the natural modesty, and we had to separate them from their parents and their values. And the easiest way to do that is sex education. Now I know people will say, oh, we should teach them how to have safe sex or safer sex, and when somebody tells you that, I just want you to say baloney. We don't take our children out and get them really good and drunk and try to teach them how to drive safely drunk. We give them a moral absolute, don't drink and drive. Why in the world would we compromise on them in this important area of their sexuality by giving them this low moral standard to live down to, rather than the very highest and best, abstinence until marriage, which works every time? But I didn't say that.
I was on the birth control pill when we were first together. We traveled on tour for a while, and at some point he approached me, and we were on the road at a hotel, and he asked me if I wanted to have a child, if I had thought about having a family before, and I told him yes.
But I looked at the test, and within like 5 seconds it was already showing positive. And I couldn't breathe. I was just in a panic and freaking out because I'm thinking, okay, this guy did this to me and now I am carrying his child.
In kindergarten, you just put the children in a circle and you go around the room and you ask them all a simple question. What do your parents say to call your private parts? Well, you know and I know every family in the world has a different name for their private parts, so by the time you reach the 3rd or 4th child, it is clear to those children that their parents do not know what they have. But we did. And we said, boys, this is what you have. Girls, this is what you have. Don't be ashamed of your private parts. And you could look out on the playground and see them sharing. We had broken down the natural modesty. They were questioning what their parents really knew, and we were becoming the experts. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, the agenda is slightly different. It's actually intercourse. Now, these kids are not interested in intercourse, but we used at that time little square books with 6- and 7-year-old nude models with diagrams showing them how to have intercourse. 1 book per classroom. You do not want a parent getting their hands on that book. And then in the 4th grade, the children are encouraged to masturbate and alone, and then in groups of 4 or 5 the same sex. Haven't figured out how that lifestyle fits in, but there it is. And then in the 5th and 6th grade, someone like me comes in. Now the goal is to get them sexually active and on a low-dose birth control pill that will not work, or pass out defective or second condoms that will not work.
It's funny how life can go from, just the heights of happiness to the depths of despair in such a quick amount of time. But we went to his family's resort in New Hampshire to tell them about our plans to marry and about the baby. And we found that his parents just, I was young and immature, and they were not very supportive of our plans to marry.
And it was a total freak out moment because I could have done what would be considered okay by society and by people around me, and I could have had an abortion and not had to think about it again. And I couldn't do it though, because the thing is, something horrible and traumatic was done to me, but going and having an abortion was just something else that was horrible and traumatic, and I would have more regrets for the rest of my life for killing a child. Like, it's not the baby's fault that this happened. It's not the baby's choice that this man did this to me, and I couldn't do it. So I remember calling my dad at work, and he just kept saying, "Are you okay?" And I kept saying, "No, I'm not." So he came home, and I just told him everything. I just started crying, and he was crying, and he said, "I just wish you could have told me, so I could have been there for you and I could have helped you." And I just told him I didn't want to disappoint you.
Now, just think about that for a few minutes. They're passing out free condoms. Do you think they buy the most expensive or the best condoms? No, they buy seconds, they buy defective condoms, and they pass those out. And when the girls came into our clinic, we gave them low-dose birth control pills that we knew, in order to provide any level of protection, had to be taken accurately at the same time every single day. For we knew one thing about teenagers, and you know it too. They don't do anything at the same time every day. You give them this birth control pill, tell her to take it every day at the same time. Her mother doesn't tell her to take it. No one tells her to take it. She takes it sporadically, even if every day. That sexual activity increases from 0 once a week to 5 to 7 times a week. The pill will not work, and we could accomplish our goal of 3 to 5 abortions between the ages of 13 and 18. So now she's pregnant. She's going to call our clinic because she had that card, free pregnancy test, licensed counselors. We were the experts. We were the ones that helped her get on the birth control pills. We could help her with her choices now. The problem is we didn't have choices. We only sold one product, and we sold it well, abortion and abortion only. When she called our clinic, we had a telephone script, actually a script used by telemarketers. Oh, we called them telephone counselors, but they were actually trained as telemarketers to sell over the telephone. And the script was designed to overcome every single objection. I mean, that's what sales is, overcome the objection and you get the order. She would confess, "I think I may be pregnant." And this telemarketer, this so-called counselor, would say, "We can take care of your problem, no one needs to know." And then the first question on the script is, "What's the first day of your last normal period?" She figures that date, gives it to this so-called counselor, who puts it on a wheel that's actually designed to calculate the birth date of the baby. But she didn't talk about birth date or baby. She said, "You're 8 weeks pregnant." Now what did she do? She confirmed this young woman's worst fear. I'm pregnant. You'd think she'd say, "Stop, how can you tell me over the telephone that I'm pregnant?" But this is the pregnancy expert. That seed is planted, that fear is confirmed, and the next question is this good news or bad news? If it were good news, she would not be calling an abortion clinic. It's bad news, and when she replies bad news, this counselor moves right back in. "We can take care of your problem, no one needs to know." Now she's identifying the fear. Why does she want to know the fear? She's going to use it to reaffirm that abortion decision anytime that young woman moves away.
Stephen made the decision to begin touring by himself and leave me at the apartment. So I was there alone, and I was in a very vulnerable position because I had no education. I had dropped out of high school. I was in an apartment with no vehicle. I had no driver's license, and I was about 5 months pregnant, but I don't really know for sure how far along I was. because I had never received any prenatal care. I had not been to a doctor yet. And I had no money of my own. So when the food ran out, I couldn't even go to the grocery store. When he would call in the evenings to check on me, and after a few weeks I told him that the food was running low, I needed to go grocery shopping. He told me that the next day, Ray Tabano would come over to the apartment and pick me up and take me to the grocery store. And I remember just being thrilled. I was going to get out of that apartment. I'd been in there cooped up for a few weeks, and I was thinking, well, I'll get to go shopping tomorrow. So I got up, I got ready, and I sat by that window and waited for Ray to come. And he arrived. I remember sitting in the window watching him walk up the stairs, and I let him into that apartment. And letting him in the door is the last clear memory I have. I woke up in a fire, and the apartment was on fire. Ray was gone. He had not taken me to the grocery store, and I was locked in that apartment. There was smoke so thick I couldn't breathe. I tripped on a table and I fell onto the floor. I crawled from there to the door, but the door locks were jammed, so I was panicked. I had to get out of that place as quickly as I could, or I was going to suffocate. And I crawled toward the back stairway that led into a downstairs kitchen, and there was a little outside exit that I was hoping to get out of. But when I got to that back stairway, it was just filled with flames and smoke and heat, and I knew that I wasn't going to get out of that apartment because the door in the front was locked and the fire was on the stairs downstairs.
But he just said, you know, we're going to support you. We're going to be there for you with whatever you want to do, as far as if you're going to keep the baby, if you want to give this child up for adoption, you know, 100% we're there. I remember the first time that it really hit me that this was going to be hard is we were at a movie. I'm diabetic. I have been since I was 2, and I passed out, and my dad just knew he had to get me to the hospital. He did, and he told the doctors, you know, she's pregnant, she's diabetic, she passed out, so they wanted to make sure everything was okay. So they came in and they did an exam, and then they said, well, should we call the baby's father? He should probably be here, he'll want to know. And I said, oh, there's no father, and they looked at me like I had 3 heads, like, okay, honey, do we need to have a talk right now? And when I said that, I told him, well, I was drugged and I was raped, and so I don't know where the father is, and he really has no business being here. And then I didn't know that by saying that in the hospital, they were required by law to call the police. So that's when the police kind of stepped in to the situation, and I remember there was a male and female officer, and they came in and had me tell the whole story of what happened to them. And then the male officer looked at my dad and said, okay, we're going to have you step outside. We need to have them have their alone time. And I just remember feeling like I wasn't the victim. I remember feeling like the criminal at that point, because the woman officer turned and looked at me and she said, okay, so now are you going to tell me what really happened?
Abortions in this nation cost from $300 to $12,000 advertised. And that's because abortions are done through all 9 months of pregnancy, not because of Roe v. Wade, but because of Doe v. Bolton, the companion case of Roe, the case heard the very same day that says for the health of the mother, an abortion can be completed through all 9 months of pregnancy. The problem is the abortion industry had a different definition for health than we do. Health to the abortion industry includes mental health. So we would say to this scared young woman, you would have problems with this pregnancy should you carry it to term, wouldn't you? She would say yes, and we'd chart in emotional health, anxiety. The biggest baby I ever held still was 32 weeks. That baby clearly could have lived outside its mother's uterus. On the day they come into the abortion clinic, they do the big baby abortions first. Now, why do they do that? That woman who has a 2nd or 3rd trimester abortion must stay in recovery longer. She loses more fluid, more blood. She needs a longer period of recovery, and you simply do not want to be paying a nurse to stay after hours to take care of 1 or 2 patients, so you do those first. Get them in recovery. There are only certain abortionists that do 2nd and 3rd trimester abortions. They come in, they bring the girl in. She can do 3 of those an hour. But in the 2nd and 3rd trimester, his fee can be up to 50% of the total cost. So let's say that $4,000 abortion that they're doing in Dallas and Atlanta, he pockets $2,000, 3 an hour, $6,000 an hour. That's not bad money. But we all know more than 90% of abortions are first trimester abortions, so we can't make that much money doing a, let's just say a $300 abortion, because that's way too low, but let's make the math easy and talk about some numbers. You know, we had a technique that we set up to help each abortionist do 10 to 12 an hour. We used 2 teams of 2 assistants with each abortionist. And the first team would set up the first girl, and he would go in to do that abortion, while across the hall, team number 2 set up girl number 2. Now, when he finished that first abortion, he ran across the hall. He didn't stop to do operative notes. He didn't stop to do a surgical scrub. He ran across the hall to room number 2, changed, put on fresh gloves, and did abortion number 2. Now, room number 2 had to be cleaned. They had to get that girl out, get her to recovery, get this room cleaned enough to bring girl number 3 in, so when he finished abortion number 2, he could run across the hall to do abortion number 3. Using that technique, an abortionist can actually do 10 to 12 an hour. Let's say $300. He makes a third of the fee in the first trimester. $100, 10, 12 procedures, $1,000, $1,200 an hour. That's not bad money either. But they have an added benefit that you and I don't have. You see, we did not want to be responsible for any portion of our abortionist malpractice insurance. They were independent contractors. They were not our employees. We collected their money out of one set of books, our money out of another set of books. On a busy day, you did not know which abortionist would do which abortion. We had 2 or 3 working at a time. So there was merely a receipt on each chart. They would collect them. At the end of the day, they would bring them up, give them to the bookkeeper, who would balance them, pay them in cash. No 1099, no W-2. Left entirely to the discretion of that person what they report to IRS, but I'm sure people killing babies for a living report everything, don't you think?
I crawled to the bedroom where there was a fireplace. It was clean. There was nothing in it. It was completely empty. And the flue was already open, and the smoke was just billowing up that flue. I fell down in that fireplace, and I knew I was about to fall unconscious. I knew that I would die, and I was very frightened. I felt that I deserved to go to hell because I had committed very many grave sins, and I didn't feel that I was prepared to die. I was fearful. And over that fireplace was a picture of Jesus. It was called Jesus, the Light of the World. It was painted by Charles Chambers. It had been my grandmother's, and thinking of that picture as I lay in the fireplace gave me the courage to pray for God's mercy. And I remembered in the psalm that was echoing Jesus' words as he died on the cross, those words came to me as I was laying in that fireplace, and I prayed, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit. Thou hast redeemed me, O Lord God of truth." And then I felt very peaceful. Even though I felt I would die, I wasn't frightened like I had been before. And I fell unconscious. And that's where the firemen found me. They pulled me out of that fireplace, some very brave firemen, and I woke up in a hospital. But when I was in the hospital, my ordeal got a lot harder. I was recovering. They had feared that I would die from the smoke inhalation, but I woke up, I was okay. And Stephen came to me and told me that I needed to have an abortion.
The big moment for me was being at church and sitting back after receiving communion, and I just kind of laid it all out there, and I was like, okay, God, I just need you to tell me what I'm supposed to do here, because as bad as I want to keep this baby, I know there's millions of people who can't have babies and would be able to give him everything, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I need you to just tell me if I'm supposed to keep him. Just show me somehow. And that's when I felt a move for the first time.
Finally, Stephen put it as a choice between him and the baby. And at that point, he told me that he was going to send me away if I kept the baby. I really just caved in at that point. I really felt like I had no one to turn to, that I had no health care, I had no job, no money, no education, I couldn't take care of myself. And if he sent me away, I didn't really have anywhere to go. And I said okay. And as soon as I said okay, things happened very quickly.
And so I went to the doctor the next day, and I walked in and they took one look at me, and they kind of pushed on my skin, and they saw the color and how everything was happening. And they said, "Are you here right now?" Because I just remember spots. I was seeing spots everywhere and I couldn't feel my hands. And they said, "We need to get you to the hospital right now." And thank God the hospital was right across the parking lot from my doctor's office. But they got me in right away. I was admitted right away. I was hooked up to heart monitors and they were doing blood tests. And it was at that point that I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. So every bit of my body that could fit the fluid that was building up was why I was so swollen, and it was toxic fluid that was just going anywhere in my body that it could find room. And at that point, the doctor said, "We need to take the baby or you're going to die."
Things happened very quickly. The doctor was already there waiting to do the abortion. They moved me to another part of the hospital. Stephen's attorneys were there. I wasn't really prepared for that by the doctor either. They wheeled me into a room. I was naked. The doctor stood beside me and he told me, hold very still, or you could be killed or injured. And I was terrified when I heard the words killed or injured, and I froze in fear. I was about to ask him, what did he mean, when he took a needle. He had been holding it out of my view so I wouldn't see it, and he stabbed my stomach with this needle and punctured my uterus and began injecting saline into my womb. And I gasped. I was horrified. I couldn't believe what he had done. I felt I just felt shock. I couldn't believe where I had ended up, how I had ended up in this place, in this room, how I had strayed so far from the right path to be in this terrible position. They told me that the saline had killed my baby, that my baby was dead at that point, and that it wasn't really a baby yet, that it wasn't. That was a lie, because they took me to another part of the hospital and I had to labor and wait for the baby's body to be delivered. Stephen was with me when the abortion procedure happened. He was with me while I was in labor. He had drugs with him. He was snorting cocaine on the bedside table. He was sitting there in a chair, and I remember him even offering me drugs while I was there. I didn't take any. I remember being very sad and just finding it hard to, it seemed so surreal. It was just hard to take it all in, that this was what life was like. This was what was happening.
I've had a lot of life experience, good and bad, but I'm not going to take away his shot at living to save me. And my parents were sitting there like, here I am, their baby, making a decision about my baby. And so the doctors came in with paperwork, and I had to sign off on everything that said they could keep me on life support if they needed to, so that he would be okay. And it was just a short time later that I went into congestive heart failure, and the fluid was just surrounding my heart. But the crazy thing for me is they just kept saying, you know, we're going to give you medicine for pain, and I don't remember feeling pain. I don't remember feeling scared for me. You know, I was content. I had my family there. I had our family priest came and kind of prayed with us, and he knew that it wasn't good, and he knew that whatever reason I was fighting them on not having the baby at that time, and they just prayed. And the congestive heart failure was just kind of taking its toll on everything. And they were just saying, you know, it's not too late. If you want to do this, we can still take the baby. And I just kept saying, no, I'm fine. Like, it's okay. And then I told my parents, like, if this is happening, just take care of him, you know, and let him know how much I love him. And that I wanted him to have everything. And it was just a short time later that the doctors came in and they said the same fluid that's killing you is now killing him, because the fluid is overtaking where he is trying to survive. So we need to take him or he's not going to have any chance at living.
We had 2 abortion clinics open. We had to open 3 more to meet my goal of becoming a millionaire. Now, an abortion clinic can open one day, pay for itself in the first month, be a cash cow in the second month. And our goal was to open 3 more abortion clinics in the next year. Now, everybody inside that abortion clinic fights. The doctors fight, the nurses fight, the counselors fight, the partners fight. It was the doctor, his living girlfriend, and me. The girlfriend and I had great difficulty. So we called in a man who was introduced to us as a business counselor who actually said he could solve our problems by merely meeting with the 3 of us an hour a week for 4 weeks. Well, you've probably figured out I can talk to anybody for 4 hours, so that was not a problem for me, and I was going to be a millionaire next year. He was a very strange man. He would not talk about money. He wouldn't talk about how much he would charge. I didn't care. I was going to be a millionaire. And we started meeting with him. The second time I sat down with him, I noticed something so very different about him. I couldn't understand it. He didn't fit in my world. He didn't drink, he didn't cuss, he didn't run around on his wife, he didn't do drugs, and I don't know why till this day, but I finally said, "Are you a preacher?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What in the world are you doing in this situation?" He said, "God sent me." I knew the man was crazy. I said, "You know, I'm a Christian. I have a Bible in the top right-hand drawer of my desk. I will have you know that I pray every day." I didn't tell him I prayed none of those women would die, and I prayed there'd be a lot of abortions today. But when I told him that I tithed on all that money, and he was not impressed, I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was in trouble. He said, "Carol, my deacons and I have been praying for some time. We believe there's someone inside this abortion clinic that God wants out." He said, "We are going to be leaving in 30 days. I was pretty excited. I'd picked up the person I wanted him to take with him when he left, but he didn't stop there. He said, "Carol, God loves you. He loves you, and he knows you can't be good enough. He knows you can't work hard enough. Carol, you can't buy your way to heaven. But because God loves you so much, he made a way of escape for you. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to walk the face of the earth, to live that sin-free life and die on the cross as the perfect sacrifice for your sins. And by the simple act of faith in Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord, your life can change." He said, "I wouldn't be much of a salesman if I didn't ask you if you wanted to pray that prayer and ask Jesus Christ to come into your life and heart." I've been a deal maker all my life, and that was such a simple deal. I actually thought, I'll just pray that prayer and shut that man up. But he is, and he was and is, the king of the weird prayer. He said, "Carol, I'm going to pray this prayer and you pray it after me." And the prayer he prayed was this: "Dear God, I am a sinner. Please forgive me of my sins. Thank you for sending your son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for my sins. Reign on the throne of my heart as Lord and Savior. Make me a worker in your vineyard. Amen." I got up, I shook his hand, I said goodbye, I got in my car, and I laughed all the way back to that abortion clinic.
When the baby's body was delivered, they gave me a shot and put me to sleep, so I didn't see what happened at that point. And when I got out of the hospital, we were back at our apartment. Stephen brought me my picture of Jesus, the light of the world, and he told me that it was the only thing that had survived the fire.
And it was literally like you could hear a pin drop in this room. Everybody got really quiet. And I just remember thinking, like, why can't I hear him? Why isn't he crying? And it was really hard for me in that second to not be angry with God because I couldn't hear him crying.
But when I got back to that abortion clinic, something had happened. Those girls were all huddled over in the corner, and they were all crying. I'd never seen that before. I'm sure it happened, but I'd never seen it before. I started taking them back to my office and sitting down with them eye to eye, knee to knee, saying, "You don't have to have an abortion. Your parents will not kill you. Let's go home. I'll go home with you and talk to them." At the end of that day, I was not saying, "Isn't this great? I saved 3 babies today." I was saying, "I lost $75. I've got 2 kids in college. Money, money, money." That's where my heart was.
And they just kept saying, "He's sick, you know, he's sick. His lungs aren't ready for him. He's big, he's really big." He was born at 7.5 months and he was 7 pounds, 15 ounces. Like he was a big kid for how young he was. And so they cleaned him off, and We heard this little cry happen finally, and they brought him up long enough for me to kiss his forehead. And then they handed him over to my mom, and they took him into the newborn intensive care unit.
I struggled to recover from the fire, from the abortion. I was altered. I was very filled with grief, and I had terrible nightmares. I would have night terrors that I would wake up dreaming of that fire, dreaming of that abortion. And Stephen took me out to New Hampshire to kind of help me to recover.
And I fell to my knees, and from the floor of that abortion clinic a few hours after the first prayer, I prayed a heart prayer. Lord, if there is a Lord, if this is not where you want me, hit me over the head with a 2x4. I did not know he had one, but he did, and it was very swift. Our clinics were caught by the CBS affiliate in Dallas, Texas at that time, attempting to do abortions on women who were not pregnant. They sent their reporter to the doctor to be certain they weren't pregnant, sent them in our abortion clinic, wired for sound, and caught us red-handed and said, "Yep, babe, you're pregnant. Got your money, why don't we just do it now?" They aired that special 27 days after that pastor said someone would be leaving in 30 days, and all I knew was it was me.
So I named him Zachary. Raymond is his middle name, and it's a family name. And he was both like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but the saddest thing at the same time, because he had feeding tubes, he had IVs keeping him going, and he was on a breathing machine that was breathing for him. And I remember looking at him and just feeling nothing but pure joy. I remember finally seeing him and just looking at him and saying, "I fought for you." And I really, really need you to fight for me now.
It was in New Hampshire that he began speaking to me about the abortion. He told me that he was racked with guilt. He said that he dreaded what God would do to him because of that abortion. And at first I remember feeling a sense of relief that he regretted it, because I regretted it, and I felt that it had been such a wrong thing to do. I was glad to hear him say that he regretted it. And he said that it had been born alive and that the nurse had to do something. As he was saying these words, I became very disturbed. I began to cry. I couldn't believe what he was telling me was the truth, that how could a baby be born alive? Well, I've read about it since then, and it's not an uncommon thing for a child to survive a saline abortion. They do survive saline abortions and then are killed by the nurse or the doctor afterwards.
I think when most people hear about abortion survivors in our world, they automatically think of a woman and sometimes a man who has experienced an abortion in their life and, suffered consequences as a result of that. And what people don't often think about is that the word abortion survivor actually describes a group of people who survive their own abortions. And I know that because I'm one of them. I don't think people recognize, of course, when they first see me, that I suffered what I did when I was just an infant. My birth mother had a saline infusion abortion, and she thought she was less than 5 months pregnant when she went in to have that abortion. And what that actually entailed was a toxic salt solution being delivered into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. And the intent of that salt solution was to actually scald me to death. If people look up a saline infusion abortion in medical journals, or you look at it online, you'll read about how that toxic salt solution is meant to scald the child. It burns the skin, peels it away, moves internally into the organs to literally burn the child to death. And that type of procedure typically takes place over about 3 days. What I know in the case of my biological mother's abortion and my life is that I soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days. And I always tell people, I can't imagine what it was like for me to have to fight for my life in the womb. because what that procedure involves is literally the child fighting, the woman feeling the child thrashing about in the womb, fighting for their life. And so not only can I not imagine what it was like for me, but I can't imagine what it was like for my biological mother. You know, to have that salt solution delivered, to go home and wait for the sign that the life inside of her had been effectively snuffed out. And then to go back to the hospital on the 5th day and have her premature labor induced in the hopes that she would deliver a dead child that day. I can't imagine. But what I do know is that when she went back to the hospital on the 5th day at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, her labor was induced with me and I was delivered. And I was initially believed to be a successful abortion. From what my adoptive parents were told, they cast me aside, left me for dead in my mother's hospital room while they tended to her. They were going to dispose of me later. You know, I know this is my life. But sometimes I can't imagine what the beginning of my life was truly like. When I survived that day and I was initially left for dead and I was laid aside, God had other plans that day. And that's what brings me great joy, is to know that in spite of how I was left in that hospital room, God allowed me the opportunity to make weak grunting noises and tiny movements with my little body. And there was that nurse still tending to my biological mother, and that's when they realized that the abortion had not succeeded in ending my life. And that's when the medical procedures began that sustained my life. And I always tell people, I know looking at me, people can find that hard to imagine. But God does miraculous things every day, and I am just one small miracle that He's performed in this world. When I first survived, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I was 2 pounds, 14 ounces, which shows that my birth mother was much further along in her pregnancy than what she imagined. And one of the first notations by a doctor in my medical records that I now have, and I share publicly, because I want the world to see what God has done. You know, in those medical records, it says that I looked like I was almost 31 weeks gestational age. And it fits. It fits with how much I weighed and certainly how I had to fight for my life afterwards. I had severe respiratory and liver problems. I suffered from seizures for an extended period of time. If you see pictures of me as an infant, you'll see pictures of me lying in an incubator with my head shaved from temple to temple, because after they realized that I had survived, they started the IVs and they were run through my head to sustain me. I required multiple blood transfusions. And, you know, the doctors have made a couple things really clear. You know, first of all, there's no medical reason why I survived. I'm okay with that. You know, I believe in a much greater healer than someone who works in a hospital. You know, and I have nothing but the greatest respect for those doctors and nurses who provided me with medical care. You know, I owe them so much, but I know who the great healer is in my life. But the doctors also made it clear that there was no positive prognosis for my life at the time. When my adoptive parents were contacted by the social workers about this little girl who had survived a failed abortion, they were told that I probably wouldn't live for very long. And if I did live, I would suffer from multiple disabilities, ranging from being blind and deaf to having emotional and mental disabilities.
We need to start getting into the minds of the girls, the young women, the women who are 45 years old and finding out they're pregnant and they've got 3 kids that are choosing to have abortions. What fears are they facing and feeling that they're going to come down to abortion as the lesser of 3 evils? Because that's what we think. Adoption is really evil because we're abandoning our child. society tells us anybody that places their child for adoption, they're abandoning their child. That's the message. I don't want to do that. I'd be a terrible mom if I did that. I can't have this child because there's no way. What about all my goals, my plans? I wanted to be a model. I wanted to, start a business. I wanted to, write my first novel by age 25. How can I do any of that with a child? How can I go to college with a child? I'm going to be a welfare mom. I don't want that. That's no way to raise a child. So the least of the three evils, parenting, adoption, becomes abortion.
It was on a Christmas party, family Christmas party, and two of my cousins told me they were pregnant. And it seemed like everybody was pregnant. So, very upsetting. And my dad said, "That's it. Do what you have to do. Here's the money. Do what you have to do." So, one of my cousins who was pregnant, she knew of a doctor in a hospital in Scranton, and whose wife was involved with a Russian adoption agency. And we got the information. And that's where we pursued the Russian adoption. And we knew that in Russia, the adoption was finalized, and there was no fear of anyone coming back for their child. And then the child would be ours. So, $30,000 later, and 2 trips to Russia, and a lot of stress and a lot of strain, we brought home our son Joshua. So we got our baby and we brought him home.
I think this is all about choice and all about really life itself, from the moment of conception to the very end of life, when we look at life issues. But we have these birth parents who maybe are not sure of what direction they would like to go with this. And for us, there's the counseling in helping them to understand and realize that there is a viable option. And actually, not to get off the subject, but there's also supporting that decision if that birth parent, that birth mom, decides to keep that child as well. But on the other hand, helping them to understand that there are childless couples out there who will provide that stability, that love, that nurturing care for their child, that maybe at that point in their life they're feeling that they're not able to do. That, when we look at adoption, is the greatest act of love.
We have a beautiful little girl who is 10, and her name is Emma, and she is just the most amazing little person in the world. She's changed our life in ways that I could never have imagined. She's made me a much better person than I ever was before. And she has multiple disabilities. We didn't know that at first, and the doctors didn't even know that at first. Her pediatrician knew at 2 days old that there was something a little awry. Her head was small. And we came later to learn that that's actually called microcephaly, which means small brain or small head.
As first-time parents, we were very excited to learn that we were expecting a baby. At 4.5 months, we went to see our baby on the ultrasound and have our doctor's appointment. And we were overjoyed as parents looking at this little baby on the ultrasound. We didn't know that there was something wrong until the doctor said, "Oh, I better go and get someone to make sure that what I'm seeing is correct."
If I were that parent who had the prenatal testing and was told that information that my child would have Down syndrome or some other genetic disorder, I would say, your world is going to change in ways that you can't even imagine. And not all of it is bad. These children and adults with disabilities, they bring something to life that you just can't even imagine is possible before they come into your life. There's a depth to life that they bring that I didn't know existed before. I lived very fast, very career-driven. I worked hard. I played on occasion. I worked more. But I didn't slow down. And that is something that Emma has really taught me. That there is so much to life that we miss in our typical lives because we are able to. But when you're given a child with special needs, you learn to appreciate things that you just totally took for granted before.
The doctor came in and he looked, and what felt like a lifetime for us was just a couple minutes to find out that our baby was a boy, which we were so excited about. But he had so many abnormalities that the doctors said that he would not walk or talk or feed himself or play and run like the other children would do. We were heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken.
Emma is 10 and started to walk on her own in December when she was 9 years, 8 months, and 1 day. Not that anybody's counting. But it was something that was just so awesome. And if she were a regular kid and she walked at 18 months or 2 years, we'd be like, oh yeah, woo, she walked. But I think having seen Emma walk at that age, it's something that has been so amazing to us, but also a gift to other people too. And I think that's the coolest thing is we get used to seeing such small incremental progress that even sometimes we kind of take it for granted after she's accomplished something. It's a gift that she gives us all. So if you're a mom who has just been told that you're going to have a child with special needs,
it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of a whole new world.
Exactly.
It's an amazing adventure that you're going to be on, and there is an adventure to it. But there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of joy, and you get to experience so much about people that you would not have imagined. It's amazing how good people really are.
The doctor said, we would like to set you up for genetic counseling to decide what you would like to do with this baby. My husband and I looked at each other like, you must be crazy. What do you mean, what we're going to do with this baby? We want to do with this baby, we want to bring him home and raise him and to love him and give him everything that he needed for as long as God would give him to us. I was completely amazed at how quickly the doctors were ready to just abort a child because maybe something was wrong with him.
I tell you, the good days, 10 to 1, outweigh the bad ones. Far. You work it out like any other problem, like any other issue in your life. You got to work it out. You cannot come first anymore, and that goes with any parent. I don't care what the ability or disability of the child is. You need to live for the kids now. The kids need to be your number one priority.
When Trevor was born, we held him, we loved him, we kissed him. We looked at him. There was absolutely nothing wrong with him. We prayed and prayed and prayed for a healthy child, and God gave us a healthy child. We did not know what he was going to be like. Trevor's almost 15 years old, and he is the most amazing young man that I have ever met. God has a special plan for him.
We thank God for her all the time. We often say that we are glad God chose us to have her, because she has just made us a complete family now. We just, she's not my disabled daughter. She's my daughter with a disability.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Our Constitution says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you think about it, it was the American Indian, and they took away the pursuit of happiness. We put them on reservations. And it was the African American, and we took away liberty. But our own children, we were taking away life.
Recently there was a law passed, and it affected the Catholic Church in how that they, actually it's, forcing them to do things which are contrary to their teaching for many, many, many years. There is a grave danger, and I'm going to speak this from a prophetic view of understanding the Old Testament, the way that God established the laws for nations. But the way that God established the law for nations in the Old Covenant, and we see that even passed into the New Testament, is that God gave certain guidelines. And when the king or the president or the ruler of a nation begins to come against those established guidelines, he does what I call legalizing abominations. For example, shedding of blood is called by God an abomination. Breaking a marriage covenant is considered by the Lord an abomination. And so when you legalize an abomination, you bring judgment on an entire nation.
The Obama administration has, through the Department of HHS, issued this mandate for employers to cover in their health insurance plans activities that many employers find objectionable: contraceptives, abortion-inducing drugs, sterilization. It's ironic and it's sad that on a list where there are serious diseases, various kinds of cancer and AIDS that are being addressed, and rightfully so, that there would also be essentially pregnancy categorized as a disease.
Obamacare is going to enshrine abortion and rationing of health care in our society for generations to come if it is not stopped. This is the most dangerous threat to human life that this country has ever seen. I truly believe that, because we will have the government promoting abortion, funding abortion, and denying life-saving medical care to men and women all over this country.
And I see a great danger in the government attempting to control health care, to tell individuals what they can and cannot do, especially as it relates to them telling us that we have to do something that's contrary to the Bible, contrary to our conscience, and contrary to our own teaching. And so I think that a believer has to take a bold stand, especially when what the government is saying is completely contrary to what God's Word teaches us.
This is not consistent with one of the fundamental ideals that our nation was founded to protect, and that is that people can come here, live together in this country, and truly practice the freedom of religion. Religious freedom means not only that you can worship where you want and how you want for an hour on Sunday, it means you can live the way you want, consistent with your faith, every other day of the week.
Look at the trend. We haven't kicked religion out of the schools. What we've done is we've kicked Christianity out of the schools. And now you see hosts of religions being taught in these schools. And the most common one, of course, is atheism, evolution, millions of years, which is part of that religion of humanism, where man determines truth apart from God.
Because there's been a change in foundation from God's word to man's word. And as that's happening, we also see a change from believing marriage is one man for one woman to marriage can be defined however you want to define it. A change from abortion is wrong to, well, abortion is legalized and you can do whatever you want to do. It's that change we see happening from God's word to man's word, from a Christian worldview to a secular worldview. That's what's happening in our culture.
Why do we have responsibility for the people today who are going to die of AIDS, or overdose on drugs, or be shot by a violent crime in the streets? Why do we have responsibility today for people who are going to die of starvation in countries where there is famine, or for the homeless people sleeping on the streets of our own cities? Why do we care? How can we believe in that solidarity when it comes to rescuing people from natural disasters or poverty or disease, and somehow have a blind spot when it comes to the children in the womb?
They say they want no God. They say they don't want the Bible to be the authority and the focal point. But what kind of world are we going to live in if we don't have those things? Because if you're consistent, we're going to have people like Hitler and Sanger, and carrying out those views. We've seen what happens. We've seen the extremes to which these things can be taken, and if we don't have an ultimate authority, as Scripture is just up to every man to decide for himself what's right and wrong, what kind of society are we going to live in? I guarantee when you see the extremes of that and you see what can happen, they're not going to want to live in that kind of society.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Don't be like the Romans who committed infanticide. These are the words of Martin Luther King Jr.
And the only way you're ultimately ever going to solve issues like marriage, abortion, dealing with that issue, sanctity of life, the racism issue and so on. The only way you're ultimately ever going to solve them is when people get back to building their thinking on God's word.
These are children without a voice unless we will be their voice. And this is truly a spiritual warfare when we have these type of social issues that many legislators today don't even want to deal with. They don't connect the fact that moral law also affects our economic law. And I truly believe that's what's happening in our nation.
People are the ultimate resource. People are the one resource you cannot do without. People are the means by which other resources are unlocked. You see, I don't believe that there's an overpopulation problem on the planet. We now have 7 billion people. We just passed that milestone last year. This is something we ought to celebrate. This is not something we ought to despair over. We ought to celebrate because by every measure of human well-being, we are better off at 7 billion than we were at 6 or 5 or 4 or 1 billion. 1800, there were about 1 billion people on the planet. The per capita income was about $100. Now with 7 billion people on the planet, the per capita income worldwide is $9,000. So our numbers have gone up 7 times, but our prosperity, our well-being has gone up 90 times.
We can see the upside down triangle of economics, where before abortion and even in the 70s, maybe the 80s, we had enough people at the lower level to support the people at the top. Now, in our society, we have an inverted triangle.
We have compromised our Social Security program by allowing abortion on demand. Before Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decision that allowed abortion on demand in all 50 states, the United States of America gave birth to about 4 million babies a year. After Roe versus Wade in the early 1970s, there were still 4 million pregnancies, but about a third of those pregnancies ended not in a live birth, but in an abortion. Had we in our midst the 45 million or so Americans who've been aborted since 1973, we would have not just a $15 trillion economy, we would probably have a $20 trillion economy. Instead of being in the middle of an economic recession, the worst recession we've known in this country since the Great Depression, we would have probably had a shallow dip and come out of it quickly because we'd have tens of millions of more workers. If we were able to increase the birth rate in this country by 1/10 of a person. So that instead of averaging 2 children, which is what Americans average today, the Americans were to average 2.1 children. Social Security would be solvent for 3 years longer. If you increase the birth rate by 2/10 of a child, it would be solvent for 6 years longer. If you were to increase the birth rate on average from 2 children to 3 children, which is what it was before Roe versus Wade, Social Security would be solvent forever. We wouldn't have a Social Security crisis because we would have enough young people coming into the workforce and creating jobs, creating businesses, buying homes and cars, that Social Security would be solvent forever. We wouldn't have to be talking about reducing benefits. We wouldn't have to be talking about delaying the age of retirement because the numbers would work.
We're seeing, and we're really troubled because of the economic status in our country. But ultimately, we have to recognize that there's a higher authority than the government, and we can't ignore the moral law. And if we do, it's to our peril.
So legalized abortion has compromised the intergenerational compact that was made between younger Americans and older Americans, where older Americans were told that if they simply worked hard and paid into the Social Security fund, that it would be there for them when they retired. Legalized abortion threatens now to break that intergenerational contract and betray the elderly.
We have a problem in this country in that human life is not valued and not respected. So when someone becomes disabled or is born with some disability, or they become elderly and either someone thinks they've become useless, maybe they've got some disease, maybe they are in what is erroneously called a vegetative state. I mean, these people not vegetables. But our country has decided that if you cannot contribute, then you're better off dead.
My name is Bobby Schindler. I'm the brother of Terry Schiavo. Back in February of 1990, Terry was 26 years old, was home alone with her husband, Michael Schiavo, and collapsed. To this day, we don't know what caused her to collapse. But from her collapse, she went several minutes without oxygen to her brain and experienced a profound brain injury. It was really from that moment on that she became dependent on others for her care. Terry's case, over the next 15 years, it really became a battle between my family, my mother and my father and my younger sister Suzanne, against her husband Michael, to try and keep her alive. Some of the things that are often reported about her condition to this day and even throughout the battle to save her life was that she was brain dead, that she had a terminal disease, that she was in a coma, that was an end-of-life issue type of description, where none of that was really true. Terry was never dying. She was not in a coma. She was not brain dead. She was not in a persistent vegetative state. She was simply a woman that experienced a profound brain injury and had every right to be cared for. But that right was denied her. And subsequently in March of 2005, she had her feeding tube taken away, and she starved over a period of almost 2 weeks.
Society's response should not be to say that if something is wrong with you or if you're having troubles, you're better off dead. And quite frankly, that's what we are seeing. There is an effort in some states like Vermont and Hawaii to pass assisted suicide measures. There will be a referendum on the ballot in Massachusetts. So this is a very serious threat, and a lot of our disabled and elderly citizens will be in trouble because if it's allowed, then they will be encouraged to take that course.
Euthanasia can be said to be abortion's evil twin. A country that kills the innocent unborn, I believe, will eventually wind up killing the elderly as well. And in part, this will be driven by sheer economics. As the Social Security program implodes, the government, at least as currently constituted, with with President Obama in the White House, will seek to cut costs by cutting off medical care to the elderly, by rationing medical care to the elderly, and by sending them to an early grave. Now, you already see that happening in China. Think about the one-child policy that's been in place since 1980.
Now, you talk about a war on women. This is a real war on women. I look at what's been happening to China, and we can look at China and how they've aborted all their little girls. Now, after so many years, the men have no little girls to marry.
We now are going into the second generation of the one-child policy, so you have many families in China which consist of 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and only 1 grandchild. How in the world is that lonely grandchild, when he reaches 25, 30 years of age, going to be able to help support his 4 grandparents, and in a few years in the future, in addition, support his 2 parents? The numbers simply don't work out. The worker-dependent ratio in China is going to be about 4 or 5 to 1. And that single worker, that single grandchild, cannot possibly support his own retired parents and 2 or 3 grandparents as well. And you already see in China an effort now to legalize euthanasia. You already see in China elderly people being turned away from hospitals, critically ill elderly people being turned away from hospitals, told, there are no beds for you, we reserve all of our beds in the hospital for people of working age. They might as well be saying, along with Adolf Hitler, you're a useless eater, go home and die, because that's what it's coming to in China. And unfortunately, if we continue down the path of aborting our future, we will come to that same pass in this country in years to come.
When the word abortion comes up, there's always a reaction to it. And I think that what I've learned over the years in dealing with my own abortion experience and finding peace with God about it because of the healing programs I've attended, plus in having fellowship and communication with other women. And you know, I've been blessed to be able to work with thousands of women and read their testimonies and hear their stories. And to see that you're not alone, and to be able to find help and to take apart your pain and come through that pain, survive the pain, survive all of the awful feelings that you've stuffed. Face the fact that your child is dead. Grieve that loss. Memorialize your child. Have a service. And you come out the other side. 2 or 3 years of processing, often it takes us 5, 10 years to, dissect it all. But you come out the other side totally aware of the fact that your child is in heaven. Totally aware of God's incredible, unconditional love that covers every sin, including abortion. And you come out with an awareness that you don't want to see the next generation go through the hell you've been through and the hell that you've watched a lot of your sisters and your friends go through.
Life is about so much more than living in pain. If life weren't important, then we wouldn't have it. And because we do have it and we are given the beautiful gift of life, we are called to live it to its fullest. And living in pain and living in grief after our mistakes is not is not what God intended for our lives. And God is so merciful, we can't even fathom His mercy. So there is nothing that any of us could ever do for Him to want us to live in that state, no matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter, because we're still here, and as long as we're here, He wants us happy.
The most important thing is to know that we have a God who loves us, who died and forgives us. And as He was dying, He said those words, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do."
I was pro-choice once, and I understand. I made the choice to abort my own child, to take the life of my own child, because I thought it was a right, I thought it was a choice. But the truth of the matter is that baby has sent you a message. By the time you know you're pregnant, that baby, that can be a different blood type, a different sex, clearly not an extension of your body, is sending you the message that it's there and that it's different. And I would say to you that taking the life of that baby may seem like an innocent thing, but deep in your spirit you know it's not, because you have some hesitancy. I don't care who you are, you have some hesitancy. I would encourage you to follow your instincts. Follow those maternal instincts. Recognize those and know that your baby is sending you a message of love and life.
If this does happen, if this did happen to someone, I can just sit here and pray to God that you can be strong and you can just think for 2 seconds what it means to fight for life, because if this does happen, you are fighting with every ounce of you for life. And I just pray to God that you can fight for life and you can look for 2 seconds at yourself and just think, it's not just me anymore, because it's not. You have that little tiny person, not fetus, not thing, not, oh, this could be a baby. You have a baby, a human life growing inside of you. And we need to fight for life.
And I think sometimes we hear that argument in our world. You know, there's only certain lives worth living, or certain lives worth saving, certain lives worth loving. But my parents didn't hesitate for a second when they were told about me. And they traveled a great distance with no money in their pocket to take the chance on this little girl they were told about. And, you know, I love my family dearly, and I love to hear the stories that they tell, that, you know, the first time they laid eyes on me lying in an incubator fighting for my life, that first time they laid eyes on me, they fell in love with me.
We need to be strong, fight for life, fight for that baby growing. And knowing that it doesn't have to be your baby, it can be, because I look at my son every day and think that is my baby. But I also think of the thousands of millions of people who need someone, because they can't have a baby on their own, and they need someone to say, here is a part of me, right, who is now all of you. Like, that's fighting for life, and it is the ultimate gift.
You know, I just met a volunteer earlier in 2012 who remembered me, having only held me one time. She remembered the little girl she was told had been unsuccessfully aborted. She never forgot me, and she came looking for me. And she always says, you know, I could never forget you because God seared the memory of your face into my brain. That's what changes this world. You know, we all perform great works. I truly believe that. But I also believe that love changes things. And I know that the love that I was given made me the person that I am today, and it helped me to survive and to thrive in spite of what happened to me.
The story of John is the story of life. It isn't about the condemnation of women who have aborted their children. It is not about 54 million babies crying out from the graves. It is the story of 54 million angels singing from the heavens a voice of forgiveness and compassion for the women who aborted them. I have a dream that our society will face women in crisis pregnancy with real solutions, with answers that will give them the ability to make decisions which are ultimately best for womankind and best for the child within them.
Without any exception, without any compromise, we will save the right to life of each innocent human being in existence at fertilization. So help us, God.
He gave them breath, He gave them life, He gave them all they need. He taught them how to move about, and then He set them free. To walk along the river, flowing ever deeper. Walk along the river, flowing ever deeper. Sing songs of forever, and happy ever after. Walk along the river of life. The choice that they would make would lead them far away, with those that still belong to Him.